The vast emptiness of space around Earth suddenly erupted with light as hundreds of massive alien ships appeared from nowhere. Their dark red hulls gleamed like fresh blood against the black void, each vessel larger than Earth's biggest cities. The alien fleet moved with perfect coordination, forming a deadly circle around humanity's home planet. On the bridge of Earth's flagship, the U's Defiance, Admiral Kim Jae-ho watched through the main viewing screen as the enemy ships took their positions. His hands gripped the metal railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. Around him, his crew worked at their stations with nervous energy. Their faces pale, but determined. Jae-ho was a man who had seen many battles in his 50 years of life. His gray hair and weathered face told the story of countless conflicts among the stars. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. The alien fleet before them was larger than anything humanity had ever faced. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the lead enemy vessel," called out Communications Officer Park Soo-jin from her station. Her voice remained steady and professional, though her hands shook slightly as she worked her controls. Soo-jin was young, barely 25, but she had trained for this moment her entire military career. "Put it on screen," Jae-ho ordered, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to command. The main display flickered and changed, showing the interior of an alien ship. The image revealed a being that would haunt the nightmares of every human who saw it. Emperor Vexthal stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body covered in dark scales that reflected the light like polished armor. For glowing red eyes stared out from his reptilian face, each one filled with cold amusement. His mouth opened to reveal rows of sharp teeth as he began to speak. "Humans of Earth," the Emperor's voice boomed through every speaker on the ship, carried by technology that reached every corner of the planet below. "I am Vexthal, eternal sovereign of the Kithran Empire. For 10,000 years, I have ruled over the stars, bringing order to chaos and strength to weakness." The alien ruler paused, letting his words sink in. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship buzzed with activity as his subordinates monitored the human response. These creatures were smaller than their emperor, but no less frightening, with the same scaled skin and predatory eyes. "You're pathetic. Species now faces the same choice I have given to 47 worlds before you," Vexthal continued, his 4 eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "The choice is simple and final. Kneel before me and serve as vassals of my empire, providing whatever resources and labor I demand. Or refuse and watch your world burn as my fleet reduces your cities to ash and your people to memory." The Emperor leaned forward, his massive form dominating the screen. "You have 72 of your Earth hours to make your decision. Choose wisely, for I have never known mercy, and I do not intend to learn it now." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge of the Defiance in complete silence. The crew stared at the blank screen, processing what they had just witnessed. Some of the younger officers looked ready to panic, while the veterans maintained their composure through years of training and discipline. Captain Lee Dongwoo, the youngest fleet commander in Earth's history at just 32 years old, was the first to break the silence. His voice carried a slight tremor despite his efforts to remain calm. "Admiral, what are your orders?" Jae-ho stood motionless for several long seconds, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. He thought of his wife and children back on Earth, of the billions of innocent people who depended on the decisions made on this bridge. He thought of humanity's long struggle to reach the stars and all the sacrifices made along the way. Finally, the Admiral straightened his shoulders and turned to face his communications officer. His weathered face showed no fear, only the grim determination of a man who had made his choice. Soo-jin opened a channel to all Kithran vessels. The young woman's fingers flew over her controls, establishing the connection that would carry humanity's response across the void. "Channel open, sir. All enemy ships are receiving." Jae-ho stepped forward, placing himself directly in front of the main camera. He knew that his words would not only reach the alien fleet, but would also be broadcast to every human settlement across the solar system. History would remember this moment, whatever came next. Emperor Vexthal, The Admiral began, his voice carrying the weight of his species' collective will. "This is Admiral Kim Jae-ho of the United Earth Space Force. We have heard your ultimatum. We have considered your generous offer." He paused, letting the tension build before delivering humanity's answer. "Our response is simple and clear. We choose neither submission nor destruction. We choose war." The words echoed across space, reaching the alien fleet and causing visible confusion among their ranks. For the first time in his long reign, Emperor Vextel had encountered a species that refused to bow before his might. The first wave of Kithrin attack ships moved toward Earth like a pack of hunting wolves closing in on wounded prey. Their dark holes gleamed in the light of the distant sun as they approached the small blue planet that had dared to defy their emperor. The alien commanders felt no concern about the coming battle. In 47 previous conquests, no world had lasted more than a few hours against their superior technology and overwhelming firepower. Commander Koi Minho sat in the cockpit of his fighter, watching the enemy formation grow larger on his display screen. His hands gripped the controls with steady determination, though he knew the odds were hopeless. Around him flew 23 other human pilots, their small interceptors looking like tiny insects compared to the massive alien bombers they were about to face. Min-Ho was 34 years old, a veteran pilot who had flown cargo runs to the outer colonies before the war began. His fighter was built on Earth using human technology that was generations behind what the Kithrins possessed. The weapons were weaker, the armor was thinner, and the engines were slower. By every measure that mattered, the humans should have been slaughtered before they could fire a single shot. "Listen up, everyone." Minho's voice crackled through the communication system to his squadron. "We all know we can't win this fight the normal way. We're not trying to destroy their entire fleet. We're not trying to save the world by ourselves. We're just trying to make them bleed." The other pilots responded with grim determination, each one knowing that they were probably flying to their deaths. But death had become acceptable to humanity in a way that confused and disturbed their alien enemies. Every human seemed willing to trade their life for even the smallest victory against the invaders. "Remember what they told us in training?" Minho continued, as the alien formation drew closer. "Make every shot count, make every death mean something, and show these monsters that humans don't know how to quit." The two forces collided in the space above Earth's atmosphere with the violence of a thunderstorm. The human fighters dove into the alien formation like angry wasps attacking a giant. Their small size and desperate tactics allowing them to slip past the enemy's defensive fire. They pushed their engines beyond safe limits, making their ships move in ways that should have been impossible. Lieutenant Yoon Hae-ri was the youngest pilot in the squadron at barely 22 years old. She had graduated from flight school just 6 months before the invasion began, and this was her first real combat mission. Her fighter had already taken heavy damage from alien weapons. With warning lights flashing red across her control panel and smoke filling her cockpit, instead of retreating to safety, Harry made a decision that would be remembered long after. Her name was forgotten. She aimed her crippled fighter directly at the shield generator of a massive Catharan heavy cruiser and pushed her engines to maximum power. The alien ship's defensive systems tried to stop her, but her small fighter was moving too fast and too erratically for their weapons to track. The impact of her fighter against the alien cruiser's shield generator created a brilliant explosion that could be seen from the planet's surface. The shields protecting the enemy ship flickered and died, leaving it vulnerable to attack from her wingmates. Harry's sacrifice had created the opening they needed, and the other human pilots poured through the gap she had made with their lives. Meanwhile, on Earth's surface, a different kind of battle was taking place in the tunnels beneath Seoul. Sergeant Park Tae-sung had spent weeks preparing the city's subway system for this moment, turning the underground passages into a maze of traps and ambush points. His squad of Marines had memorized every tunnel, every maintenance shaft, every hidden entrance that could be used to outmaneuver the enemy. When the Kithran shock troops landed in the city center, they expected to face either organized military resistance or terrified civilians. Instead, they found something that had never appeared in their tactical manuals: ordinary people who had transformed themselves into guerrilla fighters. Tae-sung was 28 years old, a career soldier who had served in peacekeeping missions. Before the invasion, He knew that his Marines could not match the aliens in direct combat, so he had taught them to fight dirty. They used the city's infrastructure against the invaders, turning familiar streets and buildings into weapons. They expect us to fight by their rules, Taesun radioed to his men as alien warriors poured into the underground tunnels. They want us to line up like good soldiers and let them shoot us down. But humans don't play by anyone's rules but our own. The battle that followed was unlike anything the Kithrans had ever experienced. Human fighters appeared from ventilation shafts, attacked from behind, and vanished into passages too small for the larger aliens to follow. They used improvised explosives made from household chemicals, turned maintenance equipment into weapons, and seemed to know the location of every weakness in the enemy's armor. Every human fighter who died took at least one alien with them, and often more. The Kithrans, who were used to quick victories and minimal casualties, found themselves trapped in a grinding urban warfare that cost them dearly for every meter of ground they captured, far above the battle. Emperor Vexthal watched the reports. With growing confusion and anger, what should have been a simple demonstration of power had become something else entirely. For the first time in his long reign, he began to feel doubt, deep beneath the shattered remains of what was once Geneva. Dr. Kong Soyoung sat hunched over a collection of salvaged equipment in a cramped underground bunker. The air was thick with dust and the smell of burned electronics, but the quantum transmitter hummed with life. Cables snaked across the concrete floor like technological veins, connecting jury-rigged components that somehow still functioned despite the destruction. Above Soyoung was 38 years old, former university professor who had become something she never expected to be, a voice of revolution. Her once neat black hair now hung in tangled strands around her dirt-streaked face, and her clothes were torn from weeks of hiding in the ruins. But her eyes burned with fierce determination as she worked to send humanity's message across the stars. The quantum transmitter had been built from pieces of destroyed communication satellites and military equipment scattered across the bombed city. It should not have worked, but human desperation had a way of making impossible things possible. Soyoung had spent days connecting circuits and modifying frequencies, driven by the knowledge that millions of enslaved beings across the galaxy needed to hear what she had to say. As Dr. Kung So-young of Earth, she spoke into the microphone, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that weighed on her shoulders. To all enslaved worlds, to every being who has forgotten what freedom feels like, listen to me now. You are not alone in your suffering. Her words traveled through space at speeds that defied understanding, carried by quantum signals that could cross entire galaxies in moments. The message reached worlds that had been under Kithran rule for generations, places where hope had died long ago. We have shown that tyrants can bleed, Soyoung continued, thinking of the battles raging above Earth's surface. We have shown that empires, no matter how mighty they seem, can fall. The Kithrans want you to believe they are invincible, but we have proven them wrong. Every day, human fighters destroy their ships and kill their soldiers, and we are just one small world, but we refuse to surrender. On the mining planet of Zarian Prime, thousands of light years away, alien workers who had toiled in the dark tunnels for decades suddenly stopped their endless labor. They had been listening to the human broadcasts in secret, passing the messages from one worker to another like precious gifts. The Kithran overseers had tried to block the signals, but human ingenuity had found ways around their barriers. The workers looked at the industrial equipment they used every day with new eyes: massive drilling machines, the transport vehicles, the heavy lifters. All of these could become weapons in the right hands. When the shift supervisor, a cruel Kithran officer, came to demand why production had stopped, he found himself facing not cowering slaves but determined rebels. The revolution that followed was swift and brutal. Mining equipment that had carved through solid rock for decades now carved through Kithran armor with equal efficiency. The overseers, caught completely by surprise, went one by one to the very workers they had oppressed for so long. Meanwhile, on the peaceful world of Altai, a species known throughout the galaxy for their gentle nature was learning that sometimes peace required war. The Altarians had been enslaved for 3 generations. their natural pacifism making them ideal servants in Kithran eyes. But the human broadcasts had awakened something in them that their captors had thought long dead. They began with small acts of sabotage, following techniques they had learned from intercepted human transmissions. Supply convoys found their cargo contaminated or missing. Communication arrays mysteriously failed at crucial moments. Kithran officials discovered that their faithful servants had somehow learned the art of guerrilla warfare from a species. They had never met Captain Song Woo-jin, experienced this galactic awakening firsthand, when he led his small team of human fighters in a desperate raid on a Kithran supply depot. His mission was simple: steal food and medical supplies for the survivors hiding in Earth's ruins. What he found instead changed everything he thought. He knew about the war, as his team fought their way through the depot's defenses. They were joined by alien fighters who seemed to appear from nowhere. These beings moved with the same desperate efficiency that had become humanity's trademark, using improvised weapons and unconventional tactics that confused and frustrated their Kithran enemies. "Sir," his communications officer whispered during a brief lull in the fighting, "I'm picking up transmissions from these aliens. They're using human tactical codes, human strategies. They learned everything from our broadcasts." Song Woo-jin watched in amazement as creatures he had never seen before worked alongside his men with perfect coordination. They communicated through gestures and shared looks, united by something deeper than language: the desire to be free. The raid was a complete success. But more importantly, it proved that humanity's example was spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. The human captain's final report contained words that would echo through history. "We're receiving solidarity messages from 17 different star systems. The rebellion is spreading." Far away in the magnificent throne room of the Kithran capital world, Emperor Vextiel received news that filled him with rage unlike anything he had ever experienced. His perfect empire, built over 10,000 years of conquest, was crumbling before his eyes. The reports came flooding in from every corner of his domain: uprisings on mining worlds, sabotage on manufacturing planets, open rebellion on previously peaceful colonies. How many systems are in revolt? The Emperor demanded, his 4 red eyes blazing with fury as he glared at his cowering advisors. The chief administrator, his scales pale with fear, consulted his datapad with trembling claws. 37 systems and growing, Your Majesty? The human broadcasts are reaching every corner of the Empire. They're calling it the right to burn free. Vextel's massive claws scraped against the armrests of his throne, leaving deep gouges in the metal. For the first time in his long life, he faced something he did not understand. These humans had accomplished something no weapon could achieve. They had weaponized hope itself, turning it into a force more destructive than any army. The madness was spreading, and it threatened everything he had built. The darkness of space around Cathara Prime suddenly blazed with the light of 1,000 ships as the greatest fleet in galactic history emerged from hyperspace. These were not the sleek, uniform vessels of a single empire, but a ragged collection of fighters, cruisers, and converted cargo ships from over 100 different worlds. Each ship bore the scars of countless battles, and each crew carried the burning desire for freedom that had spread like wildfire across the galaxy. At the front of this unlikely armada flew the remnants of Earth's once proud Space Force. The flagship Defiance looked nothing like the pristine vessel that had first faced the Kithran ultimatum months ago. Her hull was patched with metal from a dozen different worlds. Her weapons were a mixture of human and alien technology, and her crew included beings from species that had never worked together before the human. Rebellion began. Admiral Kim Jae-ho stood on the bridge, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays showing the massive Catharan defense fleet awaiting them. His uniform was torn and stained, his hair had gone completely gray during the long campaign, but his eyes still burned with the same determination that had started this war. Around him, his mixed crew of humans and aliens worked with the desperate efficiency of beings who knew this was their last chance. "All ships, this is Admiral Kim," he spoke into his communicator, knowing that his words would reach every vessel in the coalition fleet. "Today we stand at the gates of tyranny itself. We do not fight for Earth alone anymore. We fight for every world that has ever dreamed of freedom, for every child who deserves to grow up without chains, for every being who refuses to kneel before a tyrant." The response came back in dozens of languages from hundreds of different species, but the meaning was the same. They were ready to follow humanity's example to the very end. The space around Cathara Prime erupted into chaos as the two fleets collided. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers against the black void. The screams of dying ships echoed across radio frequencies. The Kithran defenders, despite their superior technology, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer determination of their attackers. These rebels fought with the same desperate creativity that had made humans so dangerous. Using tactics that no military academy had ever taught, Captain Li Dongwu, commanding the heavy cruiser Indomitable, led his ship in a suicidal charge directly toward the heart of the enemy formation. His target was the massive dreadnought that served as Emperor Vextel's personal flagship, the Eternal Dominion. The ship was larger than some moons, bristling with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. But Dongwu had learned something important during the Long War. Sometimes the impossible became possible when you refused to accept defeat. All power to forward shields, he ordered his crew as enemy fire began to tear at his ship's armor. "We're going to ram right through their defenses." The Indomitable shuddered under the impact of alien weapons, her hull glowing red-hot from the energy blasts, but she kept moving forward. Other ships followed her lead, creating a spearhead of desperate vessels that carved through the Kitharan lines like a knife through flesh, as the Coalition fleet battled in space above. Aborting. Parties launched from the attacking ships began to assault the Eternal Dominion directly. Sergeant Park Taesong led one of these groups. His team of Marines fighting their way through the corridors of the enemy flagship toward the throne room where the Emperor waited. Taesoon was no longer the young soldier who had defended Seoul's tunnels at the beginning of the war. His face was scarred from countless battles, his armor was a patchwork of repairs, and his eyes held the hard look of a man who had seen too much death. But he moved with the confidence of a veteran warrior, and beside him fought aliens from dozens of different worlds, who had learned the art of war from humanity's example. The corridors of the Eternal Dominion were like a maze designed by madmen, filled with deadly traps and defended by the Emperor's most elite guards. The Coalition forces fought room by room, deck by deck, leaving behind a trail of bodies, both alien and human. Every step forward cost them dearly, but they never stopped advancing. Finally, after what felt like hours of brutal combat, they reached the massive doors of the throne chamber. The room beyond was vast enough to hold a small city, its ceiling lost in darkness high above. At the center, on a throne carved from a single piece of black stone, sat Emperor Vextel himself. The alien ruler was even more terrifying in person than he had appeared in his broadcasts. His scaled body towered above even the tallest members of the boarding party, and his four red eyes glowed with ancient malice. Round him lay the bodies of his personal guards, proof that the Coalition forces had fought through every defense to reach this moment. "You cannot defeat me," the Emperor snarled, his voice echoing through the chamber like thunder. "I have ruled for 10,000 years. I am eternal, and you are nothing but insects buzzing around a giant." Taesoon stepped forward, his weapon raised alongside those of his alien allies. Despite the fear that tried to freeze his muscles, he found the strength to speak words that would echo through history. "Nothing is eternal," he replied, his voice steady and clear, especially not tyrants. The battle that followed shook the very foundations of the palace. A clash between the old order and the new that would determine the fate of countless worlds. The great Kithran Empire, which had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, fell apart like a house built from sand. Within just a few months after Emperor Vextel's death, the vast network of conquered worlds began to break free from their chains. World after world declared independence, and the mighty fleets that had once enforced the Emperor's will found themselves without a leader or purpose. On the former slave world of Vega 7, where purple-skinned aliens had mined precious crystals for generations under Kithran rule, children now played games among the ruins of their former prison. The massive garrison that had once housed thousands of alien soldiers was now nothing more than broken walls and twisted metal. Slowly being reclaimed by the planet's native plants, the children laughed as they ran through the rubble, their voices echoing where once only the sounds of suffering had been heard. They were too young to remember the dark days of slavery, but they had heard the stories from their elders. Above them, carved into a tall stone monument that the freed slaves had built with their own hands, were words written in the simple language that all species could understand in memory of humanity. It taught us that some things are worth more than survival. These children would grow up free, never knowing the weight of chains or the fear of masters. They would live in a galaxy where the word freedom meant something real, something worth fighting for. This was the true victory that humanity had achieved, not just the destruction of an empire, but the birth of hope itself. In the great assembly hall on the neutral world of Nexus Prime, representatives from over 200 different species gathered for the first meeting of the Galactic Council of Free Worlds. The building itself was a symbol of the new age, constructed not by slave labor, but by volunteers from dozens of worlds working together. The architecture combined elements from many different cultures, creating something beautiful and unique. Dr. Kong Soyoung stood at the speaking podium, looking out at the sea of faces representing every corner of the galaxy. She was now 53 years old, and the long war had left its mark on her. Her once black hair had turned completely white, and deep lines creased her face where worry and exhaustion had worn away her youth. But her eyes still held the same fire that had once broadcast messages of rebellion from the ruins of Geneva. She was one of only a few thousand humans left alive in the entire galaxy. Earth itself was a dead world now, its surface scarred by orbital bombardment, and its cities reduced to radioactive ruins. The price of freedom had been almost everything humanity had to give, but as she looked at the assembled delegates, she knew it had been worth it. "My friends," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast hall, "we gather here today not as conquerors, but as equals. The human species did not win this war because we were the strongest or the smartest. We won because we made a choice that changed everything." The hall fell silent as beings from across the galaxy leaned forward to hear her words. Some of them had been slaves until just months ago. Others had been free but lived in fear of the Kithran Empire. All of them owed their current freedom to the small blue world that had dared to say no to tyranny. "We won because we refused to kneel," Soyoung continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "That choice, that simple refusal to accept slavery, now lives on in every free world. It lives in your laws, in your schools, in the stories. You tell your children, the human species may be almost gone, but the idea we fought for will never die." When she finished speaking, the great hall erupted in applause that lasted for nearly 10 minutes. Representatives from worlds that had never heard of each other before the rebellion stood together, united by the shared experience of liberation, and the knowledge that they must never allow tyranny to rise again in the months and years that followed. The surviving humans scattered across the galaxy like seeds carried by the wind. They became teachers in alien schools, advisors to new governments, guardians of the democratic ideals that had cost their species so much to establish. Dr. Kong Soyoung herself traveled from world to world, helping former slaves learn how to govern themselves and build societies based on freedom rather than fear. Captain Song Woo-jin is one of the few military officers to survive the war. Established training academies where young beings from different species learned not just how to fight, but why fighting was sometimes necessary. "Freedom," he would tell his students, "is not something you can take for granted. It must be earned, defended, and passed on to the next generation." The ruins of Earth became a pilgrimage site, visited by beings from across the galaxy who wanted to see where the Great Rebellion had begun. They would stand in the rubble of human cities and try to imagine what it had been like when an entire species chose death over slavery. Years passed, and the story of humanity's sacrifice became legend. On distant worlds, when young beings would ask their elders about the Great Liberation, they would hear about the small blue planet, whose people had looked at the mightiest empire in the galaxy and simply said one word, "No," and in that single Words spoken by ordinary people who chose to become extraordinary, they had changed everything forever.